Hey guys, tonight we step into a flickering candlelit chamber at Richmond Palace. The air smells faintly of rosewater, old books, and something metallic, something final. You stand at the edge of Queen Elizabeth I's world, a space where silence weighs heavier than gold. The great Virgin Queen sits motionless by the window, her thin fingers tracing the rim of a glass she hasn't lifted in hours. Outside, winter fog curls around the palace gardens like a shroud. You probably won't survive this court either. Not from swords or schemes this time, but from the sheer tension of watching a monarch unravel in slow motion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing our little global midnight crowd gather. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself walking through Elizabeth's private chamber, where every surface reflects her legacy. The tapestries shimmer with gold, threaded victories, armada, peace treaties, and processions. But none of them tell you how tired she's become. Her red wig lies abandoned on a cushion. Without it, her hair is a thin, ghostly grey. She stares into the distance, not at you, not even at her ladies, but at some memory that refuses to fade. This is the twilight of the Virgin Queen, and you, a silent witness, can sense how time itself seems to slow around her. The courtiers whisper that she's unwell, but no one dares name the truth. The Queen is dying, though she won't admit it. Elizabeth was always a master of appearances. Since her coronation in 1559, she had built herself into an image of eternal strength. Part goddess, part mother, part impossible ideal. The poets called her Gloriana, and she made sure they believed it. Yet here, as shadows lengthen, her grandeur looks like armor that's too heavy to lift. You watch her eyes drift toward the fire. Her face, once vibrant with wit and intelligence, now seems carved in wax. The embers flicker, painting little ghosts across her features. She doesn't move. It's as if she's afraid that shifting even slightly will make everything crumble. The throne, the illusion, the legend of Elizabeth herself. The court moves around her like actors afraid to break the scene. You can almost hear the unspoken rules. No one mentions the tremor in her hand, the cough she hides behind a jeweled handkerchief, or the faint swelling beneath her jawline. These things are forbidden knowledge, for to name the Queen's weakness would be to name England's. It's said she still demands reports from her council, still signs decrees, but her handwriting trembles. Historians note that in her final months, her signature grew smaller, shakier, almost childlike, a visual echo of fading strength. Some argue it was arthritis, others mercury poisoning from her face paint, and still others whisper that her mind had already begun to drift. The Queen insists on maintaining her daily rituals, rising late, receiving her ladies, choosing her gown from dozens of shimmering silks. You notice, though, that the dresses hang loosely on her frame. Her once proud posture bends slightly forward. She no longer laughs easily. The music that once filled her court now makes her flinch. When she speaks, it's in fragments. "I am tired," she murmurs one evening, her voice a thin thread. Tired of this world and the people in it. Her ladies exchange glances, but say nothing. You feel a pang. This woman who ruled an empire now sounds like someone asking to go home. Elizabeth's weariness isn't just physical. She has lived through more betrayal, fear, and political tightrope, walking than most could bear. You can almost feel the ghosts crowding the rooms. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, executed before her eyes were old enough to remember. Her half, Sister Mary, who once imprisoned her, lovers and allies gone, some to illness, others to the axe. There's talk, quiet, dangerous talk, that her mind has turned melancholic. The queen, who once outwitted every plot now, spends hours staring into the fire or pacing the floor in silence. Her servants say she refuses to sleep in her bed, preferring to stand or sit through the night. One courtier, Sir Robert Carey, would later write that she could not rest nor yet be persuaded to go to bed, and her physicians knew not how to proceed. You watch her do this one night. The fire burns low, casting long, uncertain shadows. Her golden gown rustles as she paces, her bare feet whispering against the rushes. Each step feels like a countdown, each breath a negotiation with time itself. Outside, the Thames murmurs under the bridge, carrying whispers of the new century. England has changed, but Elizabeth cannot. The world is moving toward a future she no longer recognizes. New philosophies, new hairs, and new ambitions. She, who once ruled with dazzling certainty, now hesitates over every decision. It's almost ironic. The woman who defied expectations, who rejected marriage to preserve her power, now faces the one union she cannot refuse, the quiet marriage with death. Historians still argue whether her decline began with sickness or sorrow. Some point to physical symptoms: swollen glands, fever, loss of appetite. Others believe it was psychological, a slow unraveling of spirit after decades of loneliness and political strain. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the body simply followed where the heart had already gone. You glance at a portrait nearby. A younger Elizabeth in shining armor, hand on globe, eyes fierce and unyielding. The contrast is almost painful. She built her myth so completely that the real woman beneath it could barely breathe, and now that myth begins to betray her, demanding she remain invincible even as her strength fades. A maid enters quietly with a tray of warm broth. The queen waves it away. "No," she says softly, almost apologetically. "Not tonight." You hear the faintest tremor in her voice.
Fear.
Resignation. The maid bows and retreats, the smell of thyme and meat broth lingering in the air. You lean closer, studying her face in the candlelight. The makeup cracks slightly at her jawline, revealing dull, pale skin beneath. Even now, she insists on appearing immaculate, her white paint masking every blemish, every bruise of time. She would rather die beautiful than live seen as frail. And maybe that's the tragedy of it. Her body has become the battlefield of her legend. The same cosmetics that gave her an otherworldly glow are the poisons slowly working their way through her veins. The same discipline that made her England's longest reigning monarch is the rigidity that won't let her rest. The fire pops, startling her. She blinks, then smiles faintly. An almost human flicker through the regal mask. "You're still here," she whispers to no one in particular. "Good. Don't leave me." You stay. Because in this moment, she's not the virgin queen, not the monarch of a golden age, just a tired woman who has carried the weight of a nation for too long. Outside, dawn begins to bleed across the horizon, pale and reluctant. The light touches the walls of Richmond Palace like a benediction. Elizabeth watches it with something like wonder, perhaps realizing that every sunrise now feels like a borrowed gift. You can almost hear her thoughts in the silence that follows, the fear of being forgotten, the ache of unfulfilled love, the exhaustion of endless vigilance. Her eyes glisten, not tears, not quite, but a kind of surrender. For the first time, she whispers, "I am mortal." The words vanish into the morning mist, but they feel like the beginning of the end. The morning creeps into Richmond Palace like an uninvited guest, soft, silvery, and indifferent to the weight of the crown. You can feel the chill in the air as Elizabeth sits before her mirror, the same one she has faced for decades. Only now, that mirror no longer flatters her. Its polished surface reflects every tremor in her hand, every thinning wisp of hair, every shadow that no amount of powder can hide. Her ladies, in waiting, hover nearby, silent as ghosts. They know what must come next. The ritual of transformation, the daily resurrection of the Virgin Queen. Before the world can see her, Elizabeth must become an idea again. You watch as they unpack the small chest of cosmetics. White lead powder, vinegar solution, rouge made from cochineal insects, and that famous crimson lip stain said to contain mercury. Each item glitters faintly under candlelight, a poisonous altar to beauty and power. Elizabeth tilts her chin up. "Begin," she murmurs, and so they do. The brush strokes are tender but relentless, painting over reality with each careful motion. The white paste goes on first, thick as plaster, sealing her skin in an unbreathable shell. It burns faintly. She doesn't flinch. You can almost smell the sharp tang of vinegar as they mix it with lead carbonate, the compound that has already begun to eat away at her flesh. You notice faint sores near her temples, small cracks at her neck, places where beauty and decay are indistinguishable. "Majesty, perhaps a rest day," one lady whispers. Elizabeth's eyes snap open, still sharp, still commanding. "Would you have me frighten my subjects?" She replies, voice dry as paper. It's tragic, in a way. The same perfection that once awed her courtiers now traps her. The mask is no longer a choice, it's armor, and without it, she fears she would vanish altogether. You can't help but think that maybe she's not just covering age, she's covering mortality. You lean closer, and the irony hits you like a cold draft. Her famous mask of majesty isn't only symbolic, it's literal. And it's killing her. Historians today know that Elizabeth's cosmetics contained lead, mercury, and arsenic, each a slow, cunning poison. Lead, especially, accumulates over time, seeping into the bones, damaging the kidneys, the nervous system, even the mind. You can see the evidence now, in the faint trembling of her fingers, in the ghostly pallor that never fades even after the paint is wiped away. One contemporary wrote that her complexion did shine like alabaster, but another added, with uneasy honesty, that the hue was unnatural and stiff. That stiffness wasn't just in her look, it was in her very being. She had become the statue she wanted to be remembered as. You catch her reflection watching you through the mirror. "They must never see me weak," she says softly. "Not even God, if he watches." For a moment, you almost believe her. As the day unfolds, courtiers enter the chamber for the usual audience. Each bows low, speaking carefully rehearsed compliments about her radiance, her strength, her divine favor. You can feel their fear. One wrong word, and they'll vanish from court faster than a candle in a storm. Elizabeth nods politely, her expression unreadable behind the mask. Yet beneath that regal composure, you notice the faintest wince each time she moves her jaw. The makeup cracks at the edges. Her skin underneath it itches, burns, festers. The white lead compound reacts with sweat, forming corrosive salts that chew at her flesh. But she doesn't stop. Vanity. No, survival. Because in this world, appearance is power. She dismisses the courtiers with a flick of her jeweled hand. Once they're gone, she leans back and sighs, the sound heavy with centuries. Her chief lady, Lady Scrope, brings a small mirror to her again. Elizabeth stares into it. You watch the war behind her eyes, the need to believe that the reflection still belongs to the woman who outwitted Philip of Spain, who faced down assassins and rebellions, who turned a fractured realm into a cultural empire. But she knows. You can tell she knows. The mask is slipping, inside and out. A breeze slips through the window, disturbing the edge of her ruff. It carries the faint scent of lavender from the gardens below, mixed with something bitter. Vinegar, perhaps, or the faint chemical tang of her own paint. You imagine what it must feel like to live behind that scent every day, trapped in your own legend. You think of how she must remember her youth, the early days, the laughter, the fire in her speeches. Back then, her face was her weapon, her beauty her diplomacy. Now it's become her undoing. There's a letter on her desk, half written, ink faded at the edges. You recognize the recipient, her once trusted advisor, William Cecil, now long dead. She's been writing to ghosts. The world grows quieter. She has written, and I cannot tell whether it is peace or the dullness of my own mind. You feel the ache in those words. This is not a queen consumed by arrogance. It's a woman terrified of fading into irrelevance. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's infamous use of cosmetics contributed directly to her death. Some claim the lead poisoning theory is exaggerated, pointing instead to natural decline. But others note that her symptoms, fatigue, weight loss, tremors, insomnia, fit perfectly with chronic exposure. Maybe the truth lies, as it often does, somewhere in between a body already wary, hastened to collapse by years of self-made poison. As the afternoon wanes, the Queen calls for her small mirror again. She studies herself in silence. Then, in a voice low enough that only you hear, she says, "A painted face can rule a world, but it cannot deceive the grave." You almost want to tell her she's wrong, that history will still call her Gloriana, that centuries from now her name will stand for brilliance and cunning. But you can't speak, can you? You're just the listener here, the silent witness drifting through her last days. The candles burn lower. The scent of beeswax fills the room, mingling with that of lead and powder. Her ladies clean the brushes, wash their hands, and bow themselves out, leaving her alone with the mirror once more. For a long moment, she doesn't move. The mask gleams pale and perfect in the half-light, but behind it, her eyelids flutter, her breathing slows. You realize she's fallen into a kind of waking dream, half trance, half exhaustion. You wonder what she sees there, her father's ghost, the shadow of Mary Stuart, or maybe just herself, young again, walking through Hampton Court gardens in spring. A wry smile crosses her lips. If only it could be painted, she whispers. You stand in the stillness, feeling time folding around you. The Queen's mask, this daily ritual of power, has become her confessional. Beneath it, her humanity pulses faintly, stubbornly, refusing to vanish. And as the night closes in, the candles flicker like dying stars around her. Each tiny flame reflects in the mirror, multiplying endlessly, a crown of light around a face made of powder and defiance. The mask holds, for now. The next morning arrives not with songbirds, but with the scraping hush of anxious footsteps. You're standing in the antechamber, as two of Elizabeth's physicians whisper to each other, their voices soft but strained, like men trying to argue beneath the sound of their own fear. One of them, Dr. Parry, holds a small vial up to the light. It glimmers amber, the color of honey and secrets. She must take it, he insists. It restores vigor. The other shakes his head. It kills faster than age ever could. God help us if she drinks again from your vials. You step closer, watching as the Queen's doctors debate her fate in words wrapped with courtesy, but heavy with blame. This isn't medicine as you know it. This is alchemy, superstition, and guesswork laced with courtly dread. Every tonic they offer is both cure and poison, a roll of the dice between vitality and ruin. In the corner, the apothecary arranges jars of dried herbs, tinctures, and powders. Rhubarb root for purging, mercury for purifying, opium for sleep. You realize that in this glittering age of intellect and empire, even the royal physician is still groping in the dark. The queen appears suddenly, her footsteps soft against the rush-strewn floor. Her presence silences the room immediately. She looks smaller today, her frame swallowed by a gown of gold, threaded silk. Yet her eyes, those sharp falcon eyes, still hold command. "Gentlemen," she says, her voice papery but precise, "you debate as though I am already dead." A depre. Parry bows low. "Majesty, we only seek to ease your discomfort." "You seek to preserve your heads," she replies dryly, and you almost smile despite the tension. Her wit, even now, cuts like a blade that refuses to dull. The doctors exchange nervous glances, unsure whether to laugh or pray. You can sense their helplessness. How do you treat a woman who believes herself half divine, who will not be told her flesh is failing? She sits in her chair, extending her wrist. "Do your duty," she commands. "Doctor." Parry measures out the amber tonic, some mixture of honey, white wine, and aurum potabile. Liquid gold, they call it. It's meant to draw out illness and restore youth. But gold, even liquefied, is not kind to mortal veins. You watch her swallow it. Her expression doesn't change, but you can tell it burns on the way down. The doctors step back, bowing as if they've done something noble. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's doctors helped her or hastened her end. Some records suggest she took strong purgatives and emetics in her final months, desperate to rid her body of unnamed vapors. Others claim she refused all medicines entirely, fearing poison more than pain. Either way, it's clear the line between healing and harm was perilously thin. When they leave, she sighs, leaning back against the cushions. "They would pickle me alive, if I allowed it," she mutters. "Every draught tastes of my own tomb." A soft laugh escapes you before you can help it. She hears it and, strangely, smiles. "Ah," she says, "even ghosts find humor in my misery." There's a sparkle in her eyes for a moment, a flash of the woman who once danced at court banquets and teased ambassadors into confession. Then it's gone. You follow her later that afternoon to her privy chamber. The air here feels heavy with the scent of dried lavender and the faint medicinal tang of camphor. Her bed remains untouched, the sheets crisp, the pillows undented. She hasn't lain in it for days. Instead, she sits by the fire, staring at the flames like someone reading omens. Her ladies bring her letters from the Privy Council, urgent matters of state, but she waves them away. "I tire of ink and paper," she murmurs. "Let England govern itself for an hour." You sense something shifting. It's not defiance anymore. It's surrender disguised as fatigue. On the mantel stands a small glass bottle, filled with cloudy liquid. It catches your attention. Lady Scrope notices your gaze and whispers, "Her physic." She glances nervously toward the Queen. She takes it nightly. None of us know what's in it. You imagine the ingredients: vinegar, sugar, ground pearls, crushed coral, perhaps even a few drops of the same mercury used in her cosmetics. The mixture glows faintly in the firelight, alchemy's cruel promise of eternal youth. Elizabeth lifts the bottle, examining it. "They say it preserves beauty," she says. "Yet every morning I wake older." Do you think God finds humor in such irony? You want to answer, but she continues before you can. "I have outlived my suitors, my enemies, and my friends. Perhaps I was never meant to outlive myself." For a long moment, the firelight dances over her face. The mask of lead powder softens under the heat, melting just enough to reveal the fragile skin beneath. Her cheek glistens, not from sweat, but from the strange, metallic sheen of paint turning liquid. She doesn't notice. Or perhaps she does and refuses to care. There's a sound at the door. Footsteps. Cautious and deliberate, Robert Cecil, her most trusted minister, enters and bows. "Your Majesty," he says, "the council seeks assurance of your health." Elizabeth's lips twitch. "They seek assurance of my death." "Never, Majesty." "Oh, come now, Robert," she interrupts, her tone both wary and amused. "I taught you to lie better than that." He smiles faintly, unsure if he's permitted. The two share a moment of silence, the kind that speaks of years of unspoken truths. Then Elizabeth leans forward. "Tell them this," she says quietly. "Their queen still reigns, and when she does not, they will find no peace in the waiting. It's not just bravado. You can feel her pride, brittle but unbroken. For all her illness, she will not let them see her fade." Cecil bows and leaves, his face pale. You know he's already thinking of the future, of James VI of Scotland, of succession, of stability. But for now, Elizabeth still breathes, and so England must still bow. That night, the Queen orders her ladies to bring her wine. "Not for pleasure," she says. "For courage." They hesitate, but she insists. The goblet trembles slightly in her hand. She raises it, her rings glittering in the firelight, and murmurs, "To those who served, and those who betrayed, may they both find me unforgettable." You realize, suddenly, that she's not toasting the living. The room grows still. You can hear the faint ticking of a clock, the whisper of her sleeve as she sets the goblet down. The air feels thick, charged with the strange intimacy of endings. Somewhere outside, the chapel bells toll the hour. She closes her eyes and whispers, almost inaudibly, "When I am gone, they will paint me fairer still." And you know she's right. The mask, the tonics, the poisons, all of it will become legend. Historians will debate the cause. The doctors will record their confusion, but the truth will always shimmer between fact and fable. That Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, may have died not from a single illness, but from the lifelong art of pretending she was never mortal. The fire dies down to embers. She sits unmoving, a pale figure in the dark, caught between medicine and myth. You take one last look at the vials on her table, each one a promise, each one a curse, and wonder how many queens in history have been undone by the very tools of their image. Outside, the Thames glimmers under a thin moon. Inside, the Queen's hand trembles once, then stills. It's late evening now, and the light in Richmond Palace is strange. Too gold, too soft, the kind of glow that makes everything look half alive. You walk down the quiet corridor toward her private chamber again, and for a moment, you hear it, the sound of whispering. Not the murmurs of courtiers, but something lower, more private. You stop at the doorway. Inside, Queen Elizabeth I sits before her mirror once more, though she's dismissed her attendants. The fire has burned down to coals, and the flickering orange light moves over her face, like restless ghosts. She's speaking, but not to anyone living. "They think I cannot see," she whispers to her reflection. "But I see them all." You realize she's not looking at herself anymore. She's looking through the mirror, as if it's become a window to some other court. One where all the faces she banished, executed, or lost wait patiently for her arrival. Behind her chair, the air feels thick. You imagine the weight of memories pressing in, the music of lost masks, the clink of goblets, the laughter of courtiers long dead. She's surrounded not by people, but by echoes. "Mother," she says suddenly, her voice catching, "do you forgive me?" You freeze. No one calls Anne Boleyn by name in this palace, not even the Queen herself. But the name hangs unspoken in the silence that follows, heavy as confession. Elizabeth's eyes glisten. She reaches toward the mirror, fingers trembling. "They say I am your daughter in spirit," she whispers. Bold, clever, cursed. Her hand lingers there, hovering above her own reflection. And for a heartbeat, you almost see something. A pale outline, another face just behind hers. It's gone as quickly as it appears. She lowers her hand and laughs softly, though it's not the laughter of amusement. "Perhaps I am becoming mad," she murmurs. "Or perhaps I've simply been alone too long." You step closer, careful not to disturb the fragile stillness. The Queen begins to speak again, this time to someone else. "Robert," she says, almost fondly, "do you remember our dance at Whitehall?" She smiles faintly, her gaze distant now. "You know the name. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. The great love of her life. The one she could never marry, not without unraveling her power. He's been dead for over a decade. But tonight he might as well be standing beside her. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth ever truly loved him, or whether it was simply the affection of a woman too long isolated by duty. But you can hear it in her tone, the small break in her voice when she says his name. This isn't politics. This is longing." She closes her eyes. "I sent him away to keep my crown," she murmurs, "and lost more than he ever did." The fire crackles softly, filling the pauses between her words. For a moment, you see her as she must have been years ago, vibrant, quick, tongued, with eyes like flame and wit that could cut glass. Now that same sharpness has turned inward, slicing through memory and regret. There's a knock at the door. Her lady in waiting, Lady Scrope, enters quietly. "Majesty, it is late." Elizabeth doesn't turn. "Time means little to me now," she replies. "Leave me to my ghosts." Lady Scrope hesitates, then bows. "As you wish." She backs out, closing the door with a soft click. The Queen exhales. The room feels smaller now, the air close and heavy. She lifts a jeweled locket from her lap. A heart-shaped one, engraved with a single letter R. Inside is a faded miniature of Robert Dudley. The paint is cracked, the colors dulled, but his gaze still seems to meet hers. "You should have gone first," she says softly. "Then I might have had peace." There's something unbearably human in the way her hand shakes as she closes the locket. For all her power, for all her legend, she is still a woman haunted by the simplest truth: love denied never dies. It just waits. You feel the chill rising in the room, though the fire hasn't dimmed. She begins to hum. A strange, half-forgotten melody, one of the old court songs from her youth. Her voice wavers but holds, soft as a lullaby. Then she stops abruptly. Her gaze snaps toward the mirror again. "Marry," she says. The name is quiet but sharp. "I never wanted your death." You blink. For a moment, you wonder if she means her sister, Mary Tudor, or her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. But she doesn't clarify. Maybe it doesn't matter. Both Marys were her shadows, rivals, reflections, reminders that even queens bleed red. "You forced my hand," she whispers. "God knows it. You all forced my hand." Her reflection seems to waver in the dim light, like ripples over dark water. The gold and white of her gown blur into something ghostly. For a second, you imagine she sees not her own face but theirs. The condemned, the betrayed, the forgotten. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's final months were marked by guilt or delirium. Some suggest she suffered from depression, others from the effects of lead poisoning or insomnia. But standing here, you can feel it's all of these at once. Convergence of grief, exhaustion, and chemical decay. Her mind isn't gone, it's simply drowning in too many memories. The mirror suddenly cracks, a sharp sound that makes you flinch. A hairline fracture running diagonally across her reflection. Elizabeth doesn't move. She just stares at it. "Well," she murmurs, "even glass tires of truth." The line splinters light across her painted face, dividing her into two selves, the queen and the woman, the divine and the dying. You feel a pang of something close to sorrow. This room, once her sanctuary, has become a confessional. Every reflection holds a ghost, every silence, a voice she can't silence. She finally stands, slow and stiff, and turns toward the window. The moonlight touches her face, pale and luminous beneath the powder. She looks out over the Thames, where the water glitters faintly in the dark. "How strange," she says softly. "I spent my life ruling the world, and still the river flows as if I never were. For a long time. Neither of you moves. The only sound is the faint creak of her gown, the whisper of the wind through the glass." Then, quietly, she adds, "When I go, let no mirror face me. I've seen enough of myself for one lifetime." You understand then. This is not madness, it's reckoning. The final peeling back of all the masks she's worn, one by one, until there's only the truth, that beneath the crown, and the legend. "Elizabeth, I was just a woman who lived too long among ghosts." The fire gives one last sigh and collapses into ash. The queen closes her eyes, her breath unsteady but calm. "Let them come," she whispers. "I am ready for their company." The cracked mirror reflects her still form, its two halves catching the candlelight, one bright, one shadowed, like the twin faces of history itself. By morning, the palace is silent. The frost lies heavy on the window panes, dulling the weak sunlight that filters through. Courtiers move softly through the corridors, their voices hushed, as though afraid to disturb the stillness that has settled over everything. You stand among them, watching as the world holds its breath. Elizabeth has not risen. The door to her chamber stands slightly ajar, and beyond it, you see the queen where she sits, still upright in her chair, dressed in white, her body perfectly composed, her eyes half open but seeing nothing. Her hand rests on the arm of the chair, pale as wax. The fire has gone out, and the room smells faintly of lavender and ashes. No one speaks. For 44 years she ruled England with a will of iron and a mind like quicksilver. And now, the woman who once commanded armies, outwitted kings, and bent an empire to her will has gone as quietly as candle smoke. A lady, in waiting, her face drawn with exhaustion and disbelief, steps forward and kneels beside her. She touches the queen's wrist. The silence answers for her. "She is gone," she whispers. The words seem to echo down the halls like the toll of a bell. Someone begins to weep, softly. Another crosses themselves. You find your gaze drawn toward the mirror. The same mirror that cracked the night before. The fracture gleams faintly in the pale light, like a wound that refuses to close. In that reflection, the queen still sits whole, unbroken, eternal, even as the body before you has gone cold. History tells us that Elizabeth I died on the 24th of March, 1603, after weeks of refusing food, rest, and medical care. She spoke little at the end, and when asked who should succeed her, she named her cousin, James of Scotland, the first Stuart king. The end of the Tudor line. But standing here, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like the long breath between stories. The pause before the page turns. As her ladies begin their silent work, closing her eyes, draping black cloth across the room, you find yourself watching her face. In death, the sharpness has gone, replaced by a strange softness, almost peace. The lines of worry and pride, of calculation and restraint, have eased. For the first time, she looks less like a queen and more like a woman who has finally laid down her crown. Outside, the river moves on, indifferent. The crows have gathered in the bare trees beyond the palace garden. their cries harsh against the still air. Somewhere, bells begin to toll. Slow, deliberate, the sound carrying across the Thames, like the measured heartbeat of the realm. The courtiers begin to whisper of what comes next, of James, of succession, of new orders and old fears. But for now, the Queen remains untouched by it all. She has passed beyond power, beyond politics, into the realm of legend. You linger as they begin to cover the mirrors, one by one. It is custom, they say, to keep a spirit from wandering back through its reflection. But as the cloth is drawn over the fractured glass, you swear you see something flicker. A faint glint of gold, a shadow of a face, and then it is gone. Later, when they carry her from Richmond to Whitehall for the lying in state, the streets are lined with mourners. Men remove their hats, women bow their heads, and the sound of weeping follows the slow procession like rain. The banners bear her emblem, the Tudor rose, entwined with the motto Semper Idem, always the same. She had chosen those words herself. But now, as the bells toll and the river carries her memory toward London, you realize how untrue they are. Nothing will ever be the same again. With her passing, an age dies too. The golden illusion of a queen who was both mortal and divine, woman and monarch, virgin and mother of her realm. The mask she wore for half a century has fallen, leaving behind only the echo of a voice that once said, "I will have but one mistress and no master." You watch as the cortege disappears into the grey distance. The sound of the horses' hooves fades, swallowed by the mist. For a long time, you stand there, the cold biting at your fingers, until the palace behind you seems like nothing more than a shadow. And in that silence, you can almost hear her again. That fierce, commanding voice softened, now by memory. "Do not fear time," it says. "That is only a mirror in which we vanish." And then, like her reflection, it fades. You wake to a kingdom in mourning. Bells toll in slow waves across the countryside, echoing from village to village like a single, endless sigh. The news has spread overnight. The Queen is dead. And yet, it feels unreal, as if the nation itself doesn't quite know how to move on. You can almost feel the collective hesitation of millions, a pause before exhaling after 45 years of holding their breath under her reign. In the cold dawn, you walk the length of the Thames, watching black banners ripple on every barge. Merchants close their shutters, sailors remove their caps, even the drunks in Southwark fall silent. Elizabeth is gone, and England feels orphaned. You find yourself back in the palace, the same corridors that only days ago hummed with nervous whispers, now heavy with grief. The courtiers avoid eye contact. Their loyalty, once fierce, now floats untethered. With no queen to orbit, every man and woman here feels weightless. And somewhere in that emptiness, the ghost of Elizabeth still lingers. You feel her presence in the echo of her heels on the flagstones, in the faint trace of her perfume, rose and myrrh, clinging to the drapes. It's as if she refuses to leave. But then again, she never liked to let go. You find yourself drawn to her chambers, now sealed and dimly lit by a single candle. The bed remains untouched, a strange testament to her final days, when she refused to sleep, choosing instead to stand, motionless, in the same spot for hours. She was, her attendants whispered, haunted by shadows no one else could see. Historians still argue whether it was illness or guilt that kept her awake, whether her restlessness was the symptom of a mind unraveling, or the punishment of one too sharp for peace. But you, standing here in her empty room, suspect it was both, because Elizabeth carried her kingdom inside her. Every betrayal, every execution, every decision she made sat somewhere behind those famously painted eyes. To sleep meant to face them all again, You sit by the cold hearth and imagine her last nights. The flicker of candlelight on her pale skin. The weight of the crown pressing invisibly on her shoulders, even as her body weakened beneath it. You picture her staring at the shadows, lips moving as if in conversation with the past, her father, her mother, Mary Queen of Scots, perhaps even Robert Dudley, the one she never quite let herself love aloud. Is this what power costs? You murmur to the quiet. The silence doesn't answer, but it feels heavy with agreement. A draft rustles through the room, and you catch sight of something glinting beneath the dressing table. It's a small vial, tipped on its side, its contents long dried into a crystalline residue, lead and vinegar. Ceruse, the same deadly mixture she painted onto her face daily for decades. The stuff that gave her skin that ghostly, flawless pallor. The same beauty ritual that might have slowly killed her. You pick it up carefully, and for a moment you can almost see her reflection in the glass. Proud, composed, unflinching. The irony bites. The very mask that defined her image also became her undoing. Doctors of her time didn't understand how lead seeped into the bloodstream, attacking the organs, warping the nerves, dulling the senses. They thought it harmless, even sophisticated. The Queen's complexion, they'd say, was as radiant as her reign. If only they knew. Still, vanity alone doesn't explain the depth of her decline. Her melancholy was something darker, a shadow that had grown year by year. You recall how she had lost so many Dudley, Essex, her ladies in waiting, even her dogs and musicians. Everyone she had ever loved either betrayed her, died, or was taken from her. She had become, in her final decade, a monument surrounded by ghosts. They called it the melancholy of majesty, that strange sickness that comes from having everything, yet feeling utterly alone. You step outside into the garden, where frost glitters on the hedges like powdered silver. The roses, long dead, still hold their form beneath the ice, beautiful and lifeless like her. Somewhere, a blackbird trills a few hesitant notes, the sound fragile and almost absurd in the heavy quiet. This was once her escape. This garden. The place she walked when the weight of the crown grew too much. You imagine her pacing slowly between the yews, murmuring to herself, the hem of her gown whispering through the gravel. The chroniclers wrote that in her final weeks, she refused even to sit. She stood for hours, days perhaps, until her legs could no longer bear her. It was as if she believed that stopping, truly resting, would invite death itself. And maybe she was right. There's a saying whispered among her servants. The Queen never sleeps, for England dreams through her. You smile faintly at that, poetic and a little cruel. Because if that was true, then her insomnia was not madness. It was sacrifice. A gust of wind stirs the trees, scattering a few brittle leaves. You catch one in your hand and turn it over, noticing how its veins resemble the fine cracks in porcelain. Delicate, inevitable. Time has a way of breaking even the strongest design. When you return to the palace hall, the candles have been lit for evening prayers. Courtiers kneel, their voices murmuring in Latin, but you notice something missing. That particular sharpness, that tension that always hung in the air when she was alive. Without her, the court feels strangely gentle, almost meek. You think back to the woman who once stood here, tall and blazing in her pride, commanding silence with a glance. That same woman now lies cold and wrapped in linen, her body being prepared for its long sleep beneath Westminster. It's easy to forget she was human at all. But then, that was her greatest trick, wasn't it? To make herself myth before death could make her memory fragile. You hear one of the younger courtiers whisper to another, "Do you think she feared dying?" The other shakes his head. No, he says softly. She feared being forgotten. The words echo in your mind as you leave the hall. Outside, the sky has turned violet, the moon rising pale above the river. You imagine her looking at that same moon years ago, when she was still a young woman, perhaps wondering if the world would remember her face, her name, her reign. And somehow, you know the answer. Because even now, centuries later, her presence hasn't faded. She lives in every portrait, every coin, every word of defiance, whispered by those who refuse to bend. She lives in the quiet pride of a nation that once looked at her and saw itself reflected. You pause on the palace steps, looking back one last time at the windows glowing softly in the dusk. Inside those walls, power once pulsed like a heartbeat. Now, it's just candlelight and echoes. But you can almost hear her still. That dry, amused voice cutting through the air like silk. Remember this, my friend, it says. Queens may die, but stories never do. And just like that, the wind carries her away into the dark. It's been days now since Elizabeth's passing, and still the kingdom feels suspended in twilight. The air itself seems to hum with unease, as if England isn't quite sure who it belongs to anymore. You walk through London, and every face you pass carries the same expression. Reverent, uncertain, almost afraid. No one has seen the Queen's body, not yet. She lies in state within Whitehall, wrapped in velvet, guarded day and night by candlelight and soldiers in mourning black. They say her coffin smells faintly of roses, though some whisper that the scent is there to mask decay. You find yourself in the kitchens first, of all places, maybe because the palace halls feel too heavy with grief. The cooks still work, but half-heartedly. The great ovens roar with heat, yet the air smells of emptiness. No laughter, no music, only the dull rhythm of knives on wood. One of the older cooks, a stooped woman with flour, dusted hands, catches your gaze. She stopped eating long before she died, she mutters. Wouldn't touch her food, only broth. Sometimes wine. You nod slowly. You'd heard the same from her ladies. In her final weeks, Elizabeth I barely ate, refusing everything from meat to bread to fruit. She claimed her stomach turned at the sight of food. Some called it illness. Others called it despair. You imagine her sitting there, the long banquet table stretching out before her, silver platters untouched. Candles flickering. Courtiers watching in tense silence as she merely stirs her spoon in a bowl of broth, takes a sip, and then nothing more. Historians still argue whether this was the result of some wasting disease. Perhaps cancer, perhaps lead poisoning. Or whether it was simply the will of a woman who had decided, quietly, to let go. Either way, the body follows the mind. When the appetite dies, the spirit isn't far behind. You walk the palace gardens later that afternoon, where even the birds seem subdued. Somewhere near the edge of the maze, a gardener kneels among the herbs, trimming dead leaves. You ask him whether he saw her often here. He nods, his shears pausing. She came almost every morning, he says. Didn't speak much, just walked. Sometimes she'd stop by the rosemary and crush it between her fingers. Said it reminded her of her mother. Rosemary for remembrance. You close your eyes and picture it, the Queen in her final winter, standing barefoot on cold stone, her once golden hair thin beneath her crown, the scent of rosemary rising around her. For all her power, she seems suddenly fragile. A woman tethered to her past by a single green sprig. The gardener looks away. Some say she starved herself out of sorrow, he murmurs. Others say she wanted control. She ruled everything, even her own end. You can't decide which version feels truer. Inside, the court still pretends to function. though everything is shadowed by the Queen's absence. Foreign ambassadors whisper of James VI of Scotland, soon to be James I of England. The courtiers bow to portraits now, not to power. And yet, among the servants, a different story circulates. One of prophecy, ghosts, and a queen who foresaw her own death. She said the crown was too heavy. One maid tells you, her eyes wide, that she'd worn it too long, that she'd danced with time itself, and now time wanted a turn. It sounds like poetry, but you can almost hear Elizabeth saying it. You return to her chamber that evening. The shutters are drawn, the fire cold. The same faint scent of roses lingers. You sit where she once sat and imagine her thoughts. The taste of despair, bitter on her tongue. She had ruled longer than many had lived. She had watched the faces around her age and vanish, while she endured. And maybe that was the worst part. To outlive everything you love. You think of the portraits. How, in her later years, she ordered them repainted to hide the wrinkles, to preserve an illusion of eternal youth. Her courtiers knew better than to refuse. In one, she stands beneath a canopy of pearls and suns, radiant and ageless. But behind that perfection, the real woman was fading. It's strange, isn't it? You realize that her greatest strength, her self-control, her refusal to show weakness, became the very thing that consumed her. She had spent her entire life mastering denial of love, of comfort, of surrender. So when her body began to fail, she treated it the same way. A subject to be ruled, not listened to. And yet, even queens cannot command the flesh forever. The candle beside you gutters out, throwing shadows against the wall. For a heartbeat, the flame's afterglow looks almost like her silhouette, the high collar, the stiff bodice, the proud tilt of her chin. Then it fades, leaving only darkness. You whisper softly, "You should have eaten, Majesty." But deep down, you know it wasn't hunger she'd lost. It was desire. Desire for life, for laughter, for struggle. Once those fade, even power feels meaningless. Still, she'd refused the priests until the very end, accepting no final confession, no surrender to death's ritual. "I am not afraid," she had said. "I have ruled my own soul," a strange comfort in defiance. Later that night, you dream of her banquet hall again. The same long table, the same silver plates. But now filled with ghostly foods, apples of glass, bread that turns to dust, wine that tastes of salt. Elizabeth sits at the head, regal and hollow-eyed, lifting her cup in a silent toast. To the end of appetite, she whispers, and as she drinks, the feast dissolves into mist. You wake with the echo of bells. The real ones this time, ringing from Westminster, calling the faithful to prayer. Her body lies beneath them, now. The same woman who once feasted on victory and silence alike. You rise, stretching, and glance toward the horizon, where dawn begins to bleed gold through the fog. The world moves on. The cooks will light their fires again. The roses will bloom come spring. But something about this morning feels thinner, as though the world itself is a little hungrier now that she's gone. And in that soft, empty quiet, you realize something. Elizabeth's death wasn't just the end of a queen. It was the death of an illusion. The idea that willpower alone can outwit mortality. Because in the end, even the Virgin Queen could not command her heart to keep beating. The days following her death settle into a strange rhythm. Half mourning, half performance. England cannot simply stop. It must display its grief, dress it, choreograph it. And so, the royal court begins to prepare for one last spectacle, the final pageant of Elizabeth's reign. You find yourself standing in the great hall, watching as tailors, heralds, and musicians move like shadows through the candlelight. Black velvet drapes hang from every arch. swallowing the gold that once gleamed there. The air smells of beeswax and sorrow. At the center of it all lies her coffin, still closed, resting on a dais. Around it, courtiers rehearse the slow procession they will walk. The measured steps, the bowed heads, the careful spacing. It feels less like mourning and more like theatre. And maybe that's fitting. After all, Elizabeth lived her life as if the world were her stage. You remember her final months. The way she clung to ceremony, even as her body failed. How she still demanded the morning ritual, the dressing, the jewels, the makeup. She could barely lift her arm, yet she insisted on the white lead paint, the pearl necklace, the shimmering gown. The people must see their queen. She'd whisper, not my decay. Even in her weakness, she was directing her own myth. As you watch the preparations unfold, you can't help but think of those court masks she loved so much. The elaborate plays performed for her on winter nights. They were full of gods and goddesses, of allegory and music. But no mask could ever match this final act, a nation mourning the woman who had become its symbol. The choir begins to rehearse nearby, their voices blending into a slow, ethereal hum. The sound rises and falls like breathing. It fills the vast hall until you feel it in your chest, something heavy, solemn, almost sacred. You glance toward the courtiers, many of whom had once competed for her favor. Some weep openly. Others stand rigid, their faces unreadable. Perhaps they're already thinking of the new king, of how to bend the knee to James without appearing disloyal to her memory. Politics does not pause for grief. One man, a clerk from the Chapel Royal, murmurs to you, strange, isn't it? How she made the whole kingdom her audience. Even now we play our parts. You nod. And she wrote every line. That night, the rehearsal turns into the ceremony itself. Torches are lit. Bells toll from Westminster. The cortege begins its slow march through the city. You follow behind, among the throng of mourners. Thousands have gathered, lining the streets, their faces pale in the torchlight. Some hold candles, others flowers. A few kneel as the coffin passes, whispering prayers that blend into the cold night air. And then you see it, her effigy. On top of the coffin lies a wax likeness of Elizabeth, crafted by the royal artificers. It is eerily lifelike, dressed in royal robes, crown upon its head, scepter in hand. For a moment, the illusion feels complete, as if she might suddenly open her eyes and command silence. Children gasp. Women cross themselves. Even the soldiers falter slightly, unnerved by the perfection of it. Historians later would note that this effigy marked a turning point in English funerary art. The beginning of lifelike representations meant to comfort the living. But to you, standing there, it feels like a cruel echo. The body beneath the coffin is gone, and yet her image rides above it, defiant, eternal, untouchable. It's almost too perfect, too Elizabethan. You move with the crowd as the procession wins its way toward Westminster Abbey. The streets echo with drums and the soft cry of trumpets. Along the way, people throw herbs and petals into the path, a tradition meant to purify the air. Rosemary, thyme, bay and rue, each scent mingling with the smell of smoke and rain. At one point, a sudden gust catches the Queen's standard, snapping it sharply in the wind. The white lion emblazoned upon it seems to leap for a heartbeat before falling limp again. The crowd murmurs. Some say it's a sign, others that it's simply weather. But you can't shake the feeling that it's her, making sure the audience is still watching. Inside Westminster, the abbey glows with candlelight. The effigy is placed atop the catafalque, surrounded by golden candlesticks, tapestries, and rows of mourning nobles. You take a seat near the back, where the air feels heavy with wax and incense. the Archbishop begins the service. His voice trembles slightly as he speaks of her reign, her wisdom, her courage, her mercy. The words feel rehearsed, but then, everything about this moment is. Even grief has a script here. Still, there's a point where his tone softens, and something genuine seeps through. She was not merely a queen, he says quietly, but England itself. A murmur ripples through the crowd, and in that moment, you realize how true it is. For half a century, her name had been the realm. Her voice had carried across oceans and empires. Her signature had sealed peace and war alike. To lose her was to lose the heartbeat of an age. As the ceremony ends, the crowd begins to file out. You remain seated, watching the last of the candles flicker against her waxen face. The light catches the jeweled crown, casting tiny rainbows on the stone floor. For the first time, the effigy looks less lifelike, the features stiffening, the shine fading. Perhaps the wax is softening in the heat, or perhaps the illusion itself is surrendering to reality. You lean forward and whisper, "The mask is over, Majesty." But the silence that answers feels like applause fading in a darkened theatre. When you step outside, the dawn is breaking, soft grey light spilling over London. The crowd disperses quietly, leaving behind trampled petals and the faint echo of hymns. Somewhere, a boy sells pamphlets already titled The Life and Death of the Virgin Queen. Her story is being rewritten, even before her grave is cold. You buy one, unfold it, and read the first line, "She lived without equal, and died without successor in spirit." You smile faintly. Even in death, she manages to get the last word. As you walk away, you glance once more toward the abbey towers. The bells toll again, not for mourning this time, but for coronation. The world turns, and a new monarch rises. But beneath those towers, Elizabeth still lies in her silent finery, surrounded by roses and shadows. And somewhere deep in your chest, you feel it. That faint echo of music, the last note of her royal mask, lingering long after the curtain has fallen. The smell of paint and powder never truly leaves your mind. Even now, weeks after her burial, you can still picture the small glass jars cluttering Elizabeth's dressing table. The alchemist's workshop of a queen obsessed with perfection. Each pot and vial held some secret mixture, some promise of immortality. And yet, within those same shimmering powders lay the very substance that may have killed her. You remember the way she looked in her portraits, that flawless porcelain face, impossibly pale, her skin like moonlight pressed into human form. No blemishes, no wrinkles, no fatigue. The mask of monarchy, but behind the illusion lay lead. A poison as patient as time. You step through the old palace chamber again, now emptied of furniture, the smell of lavender polish lingering faintly. Sunlight filters through dusty glass, illuminating faint white streaks across the wood, remnants of her cosmetics, the final ghosts of her ritual. Her ladies once mixed it fresh every morning, Venetian ceruse, they called it. White lead ground with vinegar, applied thickly to the face and neck to produce that radiant, ghostly glow. The Queen demanded it daily, long after her physicians begged her to stop. Without it, she had said, "I am not myself." But lead is a silent conqueror. It seeps through the skin, travels through the blood, and slowly poisons everything it touches. It dulls the senses, blackens the gums, and drains the color from the lips. Some of her attendants wrote of her hair falling out, of her skin cracking beneath the paint. Others whispered that her teeth blackened, that her speech slurred in her final months. Yet the makeup remained, layer upon layer, covering the signs of the very thing it caused. Historians still argue whether lead poisoning truly hastened her death. Some claim it was melancholy, others infection. Still others a slow decay from years of cosmetic vanity. But standing here, breathing the faint mineral scent, still clinging to the walls, you can almost feel the poison lingering, invisible but real. You move toward her mirror, the great oval one rimmed with gilded roses. The glass is clouded now, pitted with age. You wipe the surface with your sleeve, revealing a faint reflection your own face, ghostly in the half-light. For a heartbeat, the image flickers, and you almost see her behind you, regal, composed, expression unreadable. Then the moment passes, and it's only you again. You think about how she must have stood here, morning after morning, painting her face while the world watched her transform. The act wasn't just vanity. It was ritual defense, armor. To appear perfect was to remain untouchable. For a queen who had no husband, no heir, and no certainty, appearance was power. It's strange to imagine that such power came from something so deadly. But that was Elizabeth, the woman who turned fragility into strength, who made danger a crown. Outside, you hear footsteps. A group of scholars touring the palace, their voices echoing faintly. One of them says, "It wasn't just her face paint. The lead on her wigs, her fans, even the water she drank. It all added up." You pause, listening as another adds. She wore powdered wigs coated with lead dust, and her favorite lipstick, Venetian red, contained mercury. No wonder she aged the way she did. Mercury, lead, vinegar, a royal chemistry of death. You can almost hear her laughing at the irony. That the empire she forged across seas might outlast her. But the very tools of her beauty would bring her body to ruin. A draught slips through the room, carrying with it the faint scent of roses, and something acrid beneath. Perhaps the ghost of those powders. Disturbed from the cracks of the floor, you cough lightly, then smile at the absurd thought, maybe even centuries later, the Queen's vanity refuses to fade. There's a story, part rumor, part record, that after her death, when the ladies tried to wash her face for burial, the paint would not come off. The white layers had seeped too deep, mingling with sweat and skin and age. One chronicler wrote, "It was as if the mask had become her flesh." The symbolism feels almost deliberate. You move toward the window and look out at the Thames. The water glints like liquid pewter under the grey sky. Somewhere downstream, alchemists once promised to turn such base metal into gold. But Elizabeth had done something far greater. She'd turned poison into power, artifice into identity. Still, no mask lasts forever. You imagine her one last time at her mirror, her trembling hand tracing the edge of her jawline, the paintbrush quivering. Maybe, for just a second, she saw it. The truth beneath the white, the woman behind the symbol. Maybe that was when she understood that her face had become her legacy, and her legacy her curse. You sit down by the window seat and rest your palm against the cold stone. The late afternoon light catches the particles of dust in the air, each one a tiny sparkle, like the shimmer of powder in her cosmetics. Lead made her beautiful, you whisper, and beauty made her immortal. Outside, church bells ring again, soft, rhythmic, echoing over the city she once ruled. Their sound is almost like a heartbeat, steady and distant. The scholars' voices fade away, leaving you alone with the silence and the faint metallic tang in the air. It's then that you realize something deeper. The Queen's poison wasn't just chemical, it was metaphorical. She lived in a world built on image, on illusion. To keep that illusion alive, she had to consume herself bit by bit. The lead was only a symptom of something far older, far more human. The eternal hunger to appear unbreakable. And in that, she succeeded. You rise, brushing dust from your clothes, and look once more into the dim glass of her mirror. For an instant, the reflection seems to shimmer again. Not quite her face this time, but something softer. The faintest suggestion of a smile, as though she's amused by your sympathy. Then the light shifts, and she's gone. You turn to leave the chamber, closing the heavy wooden door behind you. The latch clicks softly, a sound final, decisive, and in the quiet that follows, you imagine the ghost of powder falling gently through the air, settling over everything like snow. Somewhere in the silence, a voice whispers, faint, dry, unmistakably hers. Power always costs something, darling, even if it's only your skin. The room darkens as you step into the next memory. Not of mirrors and powders this time, but of whispers in the candlelight. Rumors that crawl through court corridors like smoke, each with a different answer to the same haunting question. What truly killed the Queen? You hear it first from a trembling servant polishing a goblet. They say it was a tumor in her throat. He mutters, his eyes darting to the door. She couldn't swallow toward the end. Not even wine. Another voice, lower and older, cuts in. Nonsense. The Queen never sickened. She died of sorrow, not sickness. And then another. No, I heard her glands were swollen, like apples. Some say it was the plague beneath the skin. You follow the trail of rumors back to Richmond Palace, the place where Elizabeth spent her final days. The walls here breathe history and mildew. The air is heavy with river damp, the faint smell of wax and illness. You move down a narrow hallway lined with faded portraits, each one staring with that same pale, painted calm. In the Queen's final chamber, light filters through thin curtains. It is winter light, soft, cold, merciless. You can almost see her there, wrapped in velvet, refusing the bed that had become her battlefield. Her physicians, Dr. Parry and Dr. D, once argued quietly over her health. A tumor in the throat, one had whispered. An abscess. Perhaps the glands are closing. But in an age without microscopes or anesthesia, no one could say for sure. You picture her trying to speak, her voice a rasp. The voice that once commanded fleets, silenced bishops, and held nobles trembling at attention. Now reduced to a whisper. Historians still argue whether it was cancer, of the throat, the glands, or perhaps something deeper, like lymphoma before the word even existed. Others suggest she may have had a chronic infection that turned septic, her body slowly drowning in its own poisons. Yet no autopsy was ever performed. The mystery was sealed within her coffin, buried with the Tudor crown. You move closer to the bed. The mattress is long gone, but the carved frame remains. Oak darkened by time, its posts still strong. It looks like something meant to outlast its owner, and in a way, it did. A journal rests on a small display nearby. A copy of an attendant's account. You read slowly. She would not suffer herself to be laid down. Her hand she held upon her heart. She would stand, or sit upon the cushions, and seldom speak. When urged to rest, she did reply, "Must I rest now? When all of England may fall asleep with me?" You pause. The words sting, not because they're grand, but because they sound so tired. Imagine the pain of swallowing. The pressure, the heat, the feeling of something lodged inside the throat that won't move. Combine that with exhaustion, insomnia, and age. Each breath a labor, each sip of water a trial, and yet she refused to stop. It's tempting to romanticize that, to call it regal resolve, as later poets did. But you can feel, standing here, that it wasn't strength so much as fear. She had outlived everyone who loved her. She was, quite literally, the last of her line. And maybe that's what the tumor really was, not flesh, but grief hardened into something physical. Still, medicine has its theories. Some historians note her long, long-standing dental issues, abscesses, gum infections, tooth decay, could have led to osteomyelitis, a bone infection that spread to her jaw and throat. In an era before antibiotics, such an infection could have become fatal. Others point to her pallor, her fatigue, her trembling, all symptoms of chronic heavy metal poisoning. The lead from her makeup, the mercury from her lip color, the arsenic sometimes found in her perfumes. It's as if her entire toilette had turned traitor. But then, there's a more modern theory, one that feels eerily poetic. Some medical historians now suspect lymphoma or throat cancer. The swelling, the difficulty swallowing, the quiet voice, the refusal to lie down, all fit too neatly. The queen who had ruled through words was silenced by her own body. You can almost hear her, pacing the floor late at night, the hem of her gown dragging across the cold stones. The candles flicker as she passes, her shadow tall and thin against the walls. She touches her neck sometimes, gently, as if afraid of what she might feel. A servant approaches with warm broth.
"Your Majesty!"
He says softly, "Please, just a sip." She looks at him, the corners of her mouth lifting in a faint smile. "If I drink," she whispers, "I might not stop." And she waves him away. The candlelight catches the hollows of her cheeks, the faint trembling of her jaw. You notice a subtle stiffness when she turns her head, as though something inside resists. It's strange how the same woman who once faced down the Spanish Armada now fought silently against her own body. But Elizabeth had always been at war. With her ministers, her suitors, her cousins, her image, and finally, herself. You think of that moment in her speech at Tilbury decades earlier, when she declared she had the heart and stomach of a king. Perhaps, in the end, that very heart and stomach were what betrayed her. A candle sputters, breaking your thoughts. Wax drips down like slow tears. Theories multiply like ghosts here. Some say it was dropsy, what we'd now call edema, a sign of heart failure or kidney disease. Others whisper about pneumonia, or even a lingering infection from an old wound. One curious document even mentions a hardness beneath her chin that grew over the months, possibly a lymphatic swelling. That small, unnoticed detail may be the single surviving clue. You reach out, tracing the air above the space where her pillow once lay. The idea of a tumor is terrifying in any age, but in the 16th century, it was practically a death sentence, wrapped in silence. Doctors had no tools to see within, no language to describe malignancy. Illness was spiritual as much as physical, a divine judgment, a moral lesson. And Elizabeth, who had ruled by divine right, would have felt that weight more than anyone. She might have thought the sickness a punishment. For her pride, for the men she sent to the block, for the crown she refused to surrender. Her last prayers, if any, must have been private. You close your eyes and imagine it, the great queen sitting upright in her chair, unable to swallow, unable to sleep, her crown resting somewhere nearby like a relic. Around her, courtiers whisper, uncertain whether to comfort or simply wait. Her breath grows shallow. Her fingers twitch on the armrest. And then she sighs, not a cry, not a word, just a long, tired exhale. For a moment, there's silence. Then one attendant murmurs, "She's gone." But you know better. She's not gone. She's here, in every theory, every rumor, every piece of lead and legend. Her body may have failed, but her mystery did not. Because Elizabeth I did what no monarch before her managed. She turned even her death into a story no one could solve. And maybe that was her final act of rule. To remain unknowable, untouchable, even in mortality. You open your eyes to the muffled noise of the city. Distant bells, the creak of carts, the wet slap of the Thames against its banks. London, 1603. The year the Queen dies, and the world holds its breath. But beneath the surface, another sound stirs, the faint, rhythmic cough of the sick. The scrape of shutters closing, the whisper of a prayer murmured through cloth. The plague is back. You smell it before you see it, the sour, heavy scent of smoke and vinegar. People burn herbs in the streets, rosemary, lavender, wormwood, believing the smell will drive off death. You pass a cart rumbling down the lane, its driver wrapped in a cloak, shouting, "Bring out your dead?" And you wonder, could the Queen's sickness have been part of this greater shadow? Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's final weakness was touched by plague or influenza. The winter of 1602-1603 was harsh, cold, damp, and ripe for disease. London's alleys overflowed with sickness, and even nobles fled to their country estates. Richmond, where Elizabeth stayed, was meant to be safe. High ground, clean air. But infection has a way of ignoring walls. You imagine her servants coughing quietly into sleeves, hiding fevers from their mistress. One sick maid, one unwashed hand, one contaminated cup. That's all it would have taken. The records are cryptic. Officially, no, pestilence touched the Queen's court. Unofficially, several attendants vanished from the rolls just before her death. Dismissed or dead. No one can tell. You walk down the palace hall, past tapestries once bright with gold thread, but now dulled to amber. Each step echoes too loudly. You can almost hear the fear that once filled these rooms, the cautious voices, the endless cleaning, the nervous glances toward the Queen's chamber door. Elizabeth had seen plague before, many times. It was the ghost that haunted her entire reign. When she was young, she fled it with her court, riding through empty villages where the air felt thick and wrong. In 1563, it killed thousands in London. In 1593, it returned again. Every outbreak carried rumors of divine punishment, that England's sins had summoned pestilence. And so, even as her body weakened, Elizabeth must have wondered, was this my reckoning? You imagine her walking through Richmond's gallery, refusing to sit. Eyes half closed, the weight of her crown invisible but crushing. The windows are latched against the cold, and the air smells faintly of vinegar. Soaked cloths hung to purify the room. Her doctors come and go. Cautious, wary men with trembling hands. They bring sweet, smelling pomanders, dried herbs, and oranges studded with cloves. They speak softly of melancholy humors, of the need for balance, of her refusal to rest. One suggests bleeding, another proposes mercury vapor. A third, braver than the rest, recommends prayer. She waves them all away. You can almost hear her say it. No man can cure what God himself ordains. But plague is not divine. It's mercilessly human. It travels by flea, by touch, by breath. If the Queen caught even a mild infection, influenza, pneumonia, or septicemia, it could have finished what time and poison had begun. Her immunity, already eroded by stress and heavy metals, would have been fragile. And that's the irony. The Queen who ruled an empire undone by something invisible. You step outside the palace, following the path that winds toward the river. The grass is slick with dew, the air damp and chill. Across the Thames, the faint outline of London rises in a haze. Smoke curls from hundreds of chimneys, and behind that smoke, thousands of stories, thousands of lives already sick or mourning. The city was dying even as its Queen did. A contemporary letter notes, many houses are shut, and the bells ring oftener than prayers are said. It's an image of England in slow decay, a nation preparing for its long night. You close your eyes and picture her chamber again. The air thick with herbs, the Queen's breath shallow, her pulse faint. One lady of the bedchamber later wrote that the Queen was troubled with a heat and heaviness in her breast. A phrase that could mean anything: fever, pneumonia, or the first sign of infection spreading through her lungs. You see her sitting upright, refusing to lie down. Maybe she knows that if she sleeps, she won't wake again. Maybe she's afraid that lying down means surrender. And queens don't surrender. But the human body always does. There's something hauntingly poetic about it. The idea that while her realm was purified with fire and smoke, she herself burned from within, her body waging its own microscopic war. Plague, infection, poison, tumor, take your pick. The result is the same: breath faltering, pulse slowing, silence spreading. You walk past a plague pit on the outskirts of the city. Now just a green rise in the grass. Beneath it, hundreds of bodies lie nameless, anonymous. But for a fleeting second, you think she might have joined them, had she not been queen. Royalty doesn't protect against mortality, it only changes how death is remembered. And in a strange way, her illness humanized her. For decades, Elizabeth had been untouchable. The Virgin Queen, half goddess, half monarch. But in those final weeks, when fever replaced majesty and her voice turned to whispers, she became what she'd always denied being: mortal, fragile, breakable. Maybe that's why people loved her more after she died. You linger on that thought as you pass back through the palace gates. The guards still wear replicas of her crest. The Tudor rose glinting in dull gold, the symbol of renewal, of beauty born from thorns. The scent of rosemary lingers in the air, once burned for purification, now for memory. And in that scent, you realize something gentle, something almost comforting. Whether it was plague or poison, tumor or sorrow, Elizabeth's death wasn't only an ending. It was a reflection, the final, quiet echo of a world she'd held together by sheer will. As she faded, so did the old England. The medieval world of superstition, magic, and divine right giving way to the modern one of reason, science, and human frailty. Her death wasn't just the fall of a monarch. It was the hinge between centuries. You turn back for one last look at Richmond's grey silhouette. The wind carries the faint toll of a bell, slow, rhythmic, patient. Somewhere, a single candle flickers in the Queen's final chamber, the flame bending low, as if bowing. The air feels cleaner now, lighter. Maybe the smoke has finally cleared. You stand at the edge of the chapel, where candles burn down to trembling points of light. The air is thick with incense and the scent of tallow. Somewhere above, a choir hums softly, not in triumph, but in resignation. The Queen has not yet died, but her faith already falters. You can feel it in the silence between her breaths. Elizabeth, once the woman who declared herself married to England, now sits motionless before her crucifix. Her lips move, but no sound comes out. She had always kept God close, but never too close. A political ally more than a spiritual comfort. But now, with death approaching, she searches the space between silence and salvation. You kneel nearby, watching her hands, thin, trembling, no longer steady enough to hold the Bible she once quoted with such command. She had been raised Protestant, yet she'd carried Catholic fears her entire life. You sense the tension in her every motion. A woman caught between two eternities. In her youth, faith had been a tool of survival. As her half-sister Mary burned Protestants alive, Elizabeth pretended devotion, whispering Latin prayers she barely believed. Later, as queen, she made religion a performance, a balance between Puritans and Papists, a delicate dance of words and decrees. But now, stripped of throne and ceremony, she faces the question no crown can shield her from. What happens when the prayers stop working? Historians still argue whether she ever found peace with her faith. Some say she clung fiercely to Protestant ritual until her final hour. Others insist she avoided priests altogether, terrified of what confession might reveal. A few even whisper that she died unshriven, her soul suspended between sin and salvation. You glance at the tapestry behind her. Faded but familiar, it depicts the judgment of Solomon. A child, two mothers, and a king with a sword. The scene mirrors her life, too neatly, the woman forced to divide her love between the people and herself, never fully choosing either. She lowers her head. Her auburn hair, thinned by age and powder, spills unevenly over her shoulder. You catch the faint murmur of her voice. I have known many crowns, but none fit me now. There is no audience left to applaud her wit, no ambassador to impress. Only the quiet hiss of candle wax and the faint ticking of her heart. You realize that faith, for Elizabeth, had always been a performance. A carefully crafted illusion, like her face paint or her speeches. But now, with no one left to perform for, she faces the raw stage of her own mortality. One of her chaplains, Dr. Henry Parry, kneels beside her. Your Majesty, he whispers, would you hear a prayer? She looks at him for a long moment. Her eyes, once bright as flame, are dull now, unfocused. Then she says quietly, I am beyond prayers. The words fall heavy, like stones into water. It's not defiance, it's exhaustion. For years, Elizabeth believed she was chosen, that her rule was divinely ordained. But the deaths of her friends, her lovers, her enemies, they've all chipped away at that certainty. When you've outlived everyone you love, even God begins to feel like a ghost who stopped writing back. She once told her council, there is but one Christ, Jesus, one faith. All else is a dispute over trifles. It was a clever political answer, but perhaps also a glimpse of her wariness. Now, that wariness has deepened into silence. The Queen's chamber is dimly lit, the crucifix gleaming faintly on the wall. Beside it lies her mother's ring, Anne Boleyn's initial A, still etched into the gold. The same ring she wore in secret as a child, tracing the letter with her thumb while praying not to share her mother's fate. You wonder what she thinks of her mother now. The mother beheaded for ambition, the daughter consumed by duty. A full circle of ghosts. You hear her whisper again, I do not fear death. I fear what waits. Her voice is barely audible, the kind of whisper that seems meant for no one. You lean closer, but she closes her eyes, as though retreating into the dark. The priests outside argue softly about whether to summon a bishop. It's a matter of decorum. A dying monarch should receive formal rites. But none dare force it upon her. Elizabeth had ruled her court by silence as much as command. Even now, her will holds. Hours pass. The candles gutter. You remember the way she once stood before Parliament, saying, there is no jewel I prefer to my people's love. And yet here, she is alone, surrounded by servants too afraid to speak. You can feel her loneliness like a physical thing, a cold weight in the air. Maybe faith isn't what leaves her. Maybe it's hope. At some point in the night, she rises, unsteadily, and moves to the window. Her ladies rush forward, begging her to rest, but she waves them off. She stares out over the dark gardens of Richmond, their shapes ghostly in the moonlight. I am tired of standing, one of them says softly. I am not, the Queen answers, for if I lie down, I shall never rise again. You know, hearing it, that she believes it, that to surrender her posture is to surrender her crown. The night deepens. The stars fade. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls for another soul lost to the plague. Elizabeth listens, her lips tightening just slightly. When dawn comes, the chaplain tries once more. Your Majesty, will you make peace with your Maker? Her answer comes slow, quiet, like the final breath of wind before stillness. My maker and I are not yet strangers. A strange calm settles over the room. You realize, as the sunlight breaks across the window pane, that her faith was never about dogma. It was defiance. To her last moment, she would not let anyone, priest, counselor, or God himself, define her. Even dying, she remains the architect of her own salvation. And perhaps that's what made her immortal. You step back, letting the image dissolve, the aging queen framed in morning light. Neither saint nor sinner, but something more complicated. A human being confronting the void with grace and stubbornness in equal measure. The chapel falls silent again. The last candle flickers, then dies. And you realize that faith, like power, burns brightest just before it goes out. Night after night, you stand watch in the Queen's chamber, and still she refuses to sleep. Her eyes remain open, two dark embers that seem to see beyond the walls. The courtiers whisper that she hasn't truly rested in days, perhaps weeks. It's March 1603. The air is cold enough that your breath smokes, even indoors. The fire has long burned down to coals, and yet she will not let anyone rebuild it. I need the dark, she murmurs, for light betrays too much. So you wait with her, in the dark, listening to the slow creak of her chair, as she rocks slightly forward and back. It's not regal now, this movement. It's almost childlike. The motion of someone trying to remember what comfort felt like. She has refused her bed entirely. The great oak frame looms in the corner, untouched, its sheets folded as neatly as the day they were changed. The Queen sits instead upon a pile of cushions on the floor, her knees drawn up, her gown loose about her shoulders. Her ladies take turns keeping watch. They kneel nearby, whispering prayers, or fanning her gently even though the room is cold. The sound of silk and breath fills the silence. Elizabeth's voice, when it comes, startles you. "Do not weep for me," she says, her tone as calm as if she were addressing Parliament. "For I wept enough when others died." She stares at the fireless hearth, as though watching something only she can see. The long vigil has begun. In the days before her death, no sleep would come. Her mind, once sharp as a blade, wanders now through a maze of memory. Her coronation, her victories, her lovers, her betrayals. You can feel it all flicker through her expression: pride, pain, fear. She talks sometimes to the air. "Robert," she whispers once. Maybe Dudley, her lifelong companion and near love. Another time she murmurs, "Mary," and you wonder if she means her cousin, her rival, the Queen she executed. Historians still argue whether those final days were marked by madness or clarity. Some believe she saw ghosts, that her conscience haunted her into delirium. Others claim her mind remained steady, that she simply chose silence when words could no longer serve her. You decide it's both, because sitting there, in the half-dark, you see no madness. Only the exhaustion of a life that never paused. Her doctors beg her to rest. One suggests poppy syrup to ease her mind. She refuses. "No," she says, "if I close my eyes, the crown will slip." You can't help but admire the irony, a woman too powerful to sleep. A single candle flickers near the window, throwing her face into uneven light. Her skin looks translucent now, every vein, every shadow visible. Her hair, once a storm of copper, lies pale and thin against her shoulders. Yet her posture, even seated on the floor, is unmistakably royal. You step closer. She's tracing something into the dust with her fingertip. The faint outline of a rose. "Do you remember the first frost of winter?" she asks suddenly. "When the roses turned to glass?" You nod, though you weren't there. "I thought then," she continues, "that even beauty can break if you hold it too long. There's a long silence. You realize she's not speaking to you, but to herself. Or maybe to the ghosts she's gathered. The courtiers outside the door wait anxiously for word. They know the end is near, but none dare ask. The kingdom already trembles beneath the uncertainty of succession. You overhear one of them mutter, "She will not name an heir." Another replies, "She will, when she sleeps." But she does not. She drifts between wakefulness and dream, her eyes half-lidded, her breath shallow. Sometimes she lifts her hand, as if to command the air. Sometimes she presses her palm to her heart and whispers, "Wait a little longer." Her mind seems caught between centuries. Part here, part lost in memory. You catch fragments of her murmuring. The armada sails again. They cheer in Tilbury. My father smiles. Each vision passes like mist. You can feel the tension in the room thickening. Time itself seems to hold its breath. Every minute stretches, fragile as spun glass. One lady begins to weep quietly. Another whispers, "Her Majesty sees angels." Elizabeth turns her head slowly, her eyes focusing for the first time in hours. "Angels," she echoes, with a faint trace of her old wit. "I doubt they dare." It's such a small joke, yet the room exhales at once. A ripple of relief that the Queen still lives within her. You can't help but smile too, even through the ache in your chest. Outside, dawn approaches. Pale light seeps through the curtains, painting the room in cold silver. The Queen hasn't moved all night. Her chaplain kneels once more. "Your Majesty, will you allow us to make prayers?" She doesn't answer. Her hand trembles, then steadies. Finally, she says, "Pray for England." And so they do. The words murmur softly through the chamber, Latin and English intertwining. You feel the rhythm of it more than the meaning. The steady pulse of devotion, rising and falling with her breath. When the prayers end, she speaks again, barely audible. "This shadow will not lift." The chaplain hesitates. "What shadow, Majesty?" She gives a tired smile. "The one that stands behind me." No one turns to look. You know better. This isn't terror. It's acceptance. She's begun her crossing, halfway between life and legend. Hours blur. The courtiers outside take shifts, afraid to leave, afraid to watch. Inside, the Queen grows stiller. Her eyes remain open, fixed on something distant. She hasn't eaten in 4 days. Her pulse flutters like a trapped bird. And yet she will not let anyone carry her to bed. Her final strength is stubbornness. The same steel that once held a nation together. When at last she speaks again, it is almost a whisper of wind. "My seat is the ground." Those who hear it later record it as a sign of humility. But you, standing near, know better. It's not humility, it's control. She chooses the moment, the posture, even the place of her decline. And as the sun sinks once more, her breathing slows, her head lowering slightly. The silence thickens again, the vigil continuing into another endless night. The courtiers light fresh candles, their faces drawn and hollow. You think of how long she has stood against the world, and realize that perhaps what she fears most isn't death, but rest itself. To sleep, after a lifetime of vigilance, must feel like treason, and so she keeps her eyes open, watching, waiting, holding her ground until the very end. You stand once again in the dim chamber, where the scent of melted wax and wilted lavender hangs heavy in the air. It's the final stretch, though no one dares say it aloud. The Queen's breaths now come thin and shallow, like a whisper through reeds. The date is March 23, 1603. The longest reign England has ever known is flickering out before your eyes. And yet, somehow, you still can't believe it. Elizabeth sits slumped against her cushions, the faint gleam of her crown jewels, now set aside on a nearby table. Her gown is rumpled, her hair unpinned, but her gaze, unfocused as it is, still carries command. A doctor checks her pulse and exchanges a grave look with Cecil, her secretary. He bows his head and murmurs, "We are losing her." The courtiers line the walls like ghosts. No one dares move too suddenly, as if any sound might startle death away, or draw it closer. You remember the first time you saw her, radiant, unshakable, her laughter echoing down the corridors of Whitehall. Now, she seems half shadow, half saint. Her lips part slightly, and you lean closer, certain she means to speak. What comes out is almost too soft to catch. Do not let them see me weak. Her ladies, in waiting, exchange glances, tears glimmering in their eyes. Even now, her pride burns fierce. She hasn't slept in days. Some say her mind has wandered beyond the realm of reason. Others believe she's communing with something beyond the veil. Historians still argue whether her silence in those final hours was stubbornness or serenity. Whether she met death like a queen, or hid from it like a woman. You think it was both. A candle pops, sending a curl of smoke into the air. The queen's eyes flicker toward it, perhaps mistaking the sound for thunder or applause. Her voice is faint but clear. Do you hear them cheering? No one answers. She smiles barely. Tilbury again, she whispers, remembering that day she rode before her troops, promising she had the heart and stomach of a king. You can almost see it too. The wind whipping her hair, the armor glinting under a restless sky. Then her gaze softens, unfocusing. They were so young, she says. You realize she's speaking of her soldiers. Or maybe of everyone who's ever served her. Or maybe of England itself. A child she's raised, now old enough to outlive her. The doctors step back. There's nothing left to do. Cecil kneels beside her, voice steady but trembling underneath. Majesty, he says gently, whom do you name as successor? It's the question they've all feared to ask. The one she's evaded for years. She doesn't reply at first. Then her lips move, forming a name so faint you almost miss it. James, she breathes. James VI of Scotland. Cecil nods solemnly. He understands. England's crown will pass north, to the son of her executed rival, Mary Queen of Scots. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Her final act is unity, a quiet surrender that ensures peace after her. You watch as Cecil withdraws, already whispering to his aides to prepare the announcement. The political machinery of England begins to hum softly, even before its heart stops beating. Inside the chamber, the air feels different now. Lighter, somehow, as if the decision itself has unburdened her. The Queen's eyes close halfway, her breathing slows. One of her ladies murmurs a psalm, her voice trembling. Outside, the rain begins. A soft, steady drizzle tapping against the window panes. The sound fills the silence with a rhythm both mournful and oddly soothing. You remember the stories of her youth, how she would walk in storms, unbothered by thunder, declaring that Queen fears no weather. Now the storm comes to her, soft and grey, washing over the last flicker of her reign. Hours pass. The courtiers drift in and out, too weary to stand vigil without rest. You remain, counting each breath, unsure which will be the last. At one point, her fingers twitch. A small, graceful movement, like she's reaching for something invisible. Majesty, a lady whispers. Elizabeth's eyes open one final time. The pupils are glassy now, reflecting only candlelight. Her lips move, forming 3 slow words. All is done. Her hand falls still, and then, nothing. No trumpet, no divine light, no final decree. Just silence. The stillness stretches. 1 heartbeat. 2. A lifetime. Finally, the doctor bows his head, The queen is dead. A sob breaks from one of the ladies. Another crosses herself. The great Tudor reign, born in fire, ended in stillness, slips quietly into legend. You step back, your own breath shaking. The world feels altered, as if the air itself recognizes that something immense has ended. In the hallway, Cecil's voice can be heard, low but firm. Long live the king. You outside, the dawn breaks. The first light of a new era spills through the window, painting the queen's still face in gold. She almost looks alive, serene, unburdened, even smiling slightly, as though she's finally earned her rest. The courtiers kneel. You follow, bowing your head, feeling the weight of centuries in your chest. You think of all she carried, the rebellions, the victories, the loneliness, the crown that cost her peace, the woman who turned England from trembling to triumphant. And now she sleeps. Historians later describe her death as peaceful, though some whisper of the strange glow in her chamber that night, or the scent of roses that lingered long after the candles went out. One rumor claims she whispered a final word none could quite hear. Remember. You like that one best, because remembering her is the only way to keep her alive. You linger as they prepare her body. The courtiers drape her in white silk, place a small cross upon her chest, and pull the curtains closed. The crown, newly polished, gleams faintly on the table beside her, patient, waiting to rest on another head. But for this moment, it belongs to no one. And in that brief space between monarchs, between breath and silence, between one heartbeat and the next, England itself seems to hold its breath with her. You wake before dawn again, though the term wake feels strange now, in a world where the Queen no longer does. The bells of Richmond toll faintly in the mist, their tones spreading like ripples across the river. The sound is both mournful and stately, as if the land itself insists on keeping perfect rhythm for her departure. Elizabeth is gone, and yet her presence still clings to every corner. The scent of her perfumes, the whisper of her voice echoing in the silk curtains, the faint indent on the cushions where she sat for her final vigil. You move quietly through the chamber as attendants file in, pale and sullen, carrying white cloths and sprigs of rosemary. They speak softly, in the same tone one uses in a church. For remembrance, one murmurs, laying the herb near her pillow. Through the window, the first weak light of March spreads across the gardens. The air is cold, heavy with dew, and the Thames moves like slow glass beneath a layer of fog. They prepare her for her final procession. The Queen, who ruled for 44 years, who defeated Spain, who outlived every advisor, every suitor, every rival, is now just a body wrapped in linen. But even like this, she commands reverence. Her face looks calm, even younger somehow. The frown lines of decades have softened. Her mouth has the faintest trace of a smile. You can almost imagine her whispering one last teasing line. Well, I did warn you I'd live forever. They place her on a board draped in purple velvet, and crown her one last time with a wreath of flowers. A faint breeze stirs the fabric, and for a moment you half expect her eyes to open again, to give one final order, one last wry remark about punctuality or politics. But she remains still. Outside, the court gathers in black, lords, bishops, soldiers, and servants alike, all lined along the path as her coffin begins its long, slow journey to Westminster Abbey. The horses move at a measured pace, their hooves muffled by straw. People kneel as the procession passes. Some cross themselves. Others whisper prayers. More than a few weep openly. You walk with them, every step echoing across the cobblestones. The silence is broken only by the low hum of psalms and the occasional cry of a child too young to understand what loss truly means. London itself seems subdued. Shops shuttered, windows hung with black drapes. Even the gulls circling the riverbanks seem quieter. And yet, beneath the mourning, you sense something else: relief. Continuity. The understanding that England endures, even when its heart has stopped beating. When the procession reaches Westminster, the bells thunder again. Inside the abbey, the air is cool and candlelit. Every flicker of flame reflects on golden tapestries depicting the victories of her reign. You notice one. A scene of Tilbury. There she stands, painted forever in armor, hand raised, the embodiment of unflinching resolve. Beneath it now lies her coffin, draped in white and crimson. The Archbishop begins the service. His voice trembles as he speaks of her courage, her wisdom, her mercy. You think of all the contradictions hidden behind those words. The sharp wit, the jealous rage, the loneliness she disguised so well. And yet, he's not wrong. For all her flaws, Elizabeth was mercy when she could have been wrath. She was strength when the world expected frailty. And above all, she was England. Both brilliant and burdened. Historians still argue whether she died of pneumonia, blood poisoning, or sheer exhaustion. Some even whisper of mercury in her cosmetics. The fatal price of her powdered beauty. But you suspect the truth is simpler. She died of being Elizabeth too long. Because no mortal can carry a crown that heavy forever. As the choir sings, the sound rises through the vaulted ceiling like light itself. You close your eyes and see her again. Not as the dying monarch, but as the woman who once danced in candlelight, who laughed until her courtiers blushed, who faced down kings and armies with a tilt of her chin. When the service ends, they lower her into the crypt beside her half, Sister Mary. Two queens, once enemies, now forever side by side in the same cold earth. There's a quiet poetry to it. The Tudor sisters, reconciled in silence. You linger as the crowd disperses, the echoes of footsteps fading into the ancient stone. The abbey feels timeless, the kind of place where memory becomes more real than flesh. You run your hand along the edge of the stone effigy that will soon bear her likeness. The carved face looks serene, detached. Not quite her, but enough to make your chest ache. And as you stand there, you think of everything she leaves behind: a united kingdom, a golden age of art and discovery, a legacy that will never entirely sleep. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying the faint sound of church bells across the city once more. The people cheer, not loudly, but with a soft, reverent kind of pride. England is safe. The Queen is at peace. You take a final look at her resting place, whispering under your breath, "Farewell, Gloriana." And somewhere, in that stillness, it almost feels like she answers, not in words, but in the hush of the abbey air, in the warmth that flickers just long enough to make you doubt the chill of death. Perhaps that's her last gift, not fear, not grandeur, but quiet continuity. You leave the abbey slowly, your footsteps echoing down the nave. The sunlight breaks through the clouds at last, spilling golden rays across the flagstones. Dust motes dance in the light, tiny coronations floating in the air, and you realize she isn't gone. Not really. She's just part of the light now. The story slows here, soft and weightless. You exhale, letting the centuries settle. The flicker of candles becomes the hum of your room, the heartbeat of history fading into quiet. You picture the Queen resting beneath her marble canopy, the world above her still turning. Rivers shifting, trees budding, children laughing where once soldiers marched. Time carries her gently now, the way a tide carries driftwood. It's strange to think how much one life can shape so many others. How a single woman, half mortal and half myth, could define an entire era. But that's what Elizabeth did. And maybe that's what we all try to do. To leave some shimmer of ourselves behind, even if it's only a whisper in the dark. Her crown rests elsewhere now, her name etched into stone. But the real legacy, the living one, is quieter. It's in the courage to rule your own heart, to stand firm even when the world doubts you, to wear your scars like jewels and keep going. So as you lie there now, eyes heavy, let her story drift around you like a lullaby of gold and shadow. The bells grow distant. The air softens. History sighs itself to sleep. Sweet dreams.